Look at the world in the summer of 1914. If you were standing in the streets of Paris, London, or Berlin, you would see a civilization at its absolute peak. This was the Belle Époque, the beautiful era. Paris was dancing, the cafes were full, and the sun seemed like it would never set on the long-standing peace of Europe. It had been 45 years since the last major conflict. People truly believed that the world was too interconnected, too civilized, and too modern for a great war to ever happen again. But beneath the champagne and the sunlight, a doomsday machine was being built. Europe was not just at peace, it was an armed peace. And while the people danced, the generals were staring at maps, the factories were forging steel, and the clocks were ticking toward a tragedy that would claim over 10 million lives. The tension was rooted in old wounds and new ambitions. France still bled from the unhealed wound of 1871, when they lost the territories of Alsace and Lorraine to the Germans. They harbored a bitter, silent hatred for their neighbors. Meanwhile, Germany, led by the ambitious and envious Kaiser Wilhelm II, wanted its place in the sun. The Kaiser was obsessed with the British Royal Navy. He didn't just want to be a continental power, he wanted a fleet that could dominate the seas. This triggered a terrifying arms race. When Britain launched the HMS Dreadnought, it changed naval warfare forever. Every nation suddenly wanted these super ships. By 1913, vessels like the Queen Elizabeth could fire 15,000-pound broadsides. Europe was a powder keg of alliances. You had the Triple Entente, Britain, France, and Russia, facing off against the Central Powers, Germany and Austria-Hungary. The irony was that the leaders of these nations, the King of England, the Kaiser of Germany, and the Tsar of Russia, were all cousins, but blood was not enough to stop the gears of war. The spark finally came on a hot Sunday in June 1914. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, was visiting Sarajevo. Through a series of blunders and a wrong turn by his driver, he was put directly in the path of Gavrilo Princip, a Serbian nationalist. 2 shots were fired. The Archduke and his wife, Sophie, were killed. In a different world, this might have been a local crisis, but because of the secret treaties and rigid military timetables, it became a global death sentence. Austria-Hungary issued an impossible ultimatum to Serbia. Russia mobilized to help Serbia. Germany mobilized to help Austria. And because Germany's only war plan involved knocking out France first, they began their march toward Paris. The German strategy was called the Schlieffen Plan. It was a cold, mathematical gamble. The Germans believed they could defeat France in exactly 42 days before turning east to fight the slow-moving Russian steamroller. To do it, they had to cut through neutral Belgium. When German boots crossed the Belgian border, Britain, which had promised to protect Belgian neutrality, declared war. The British Expeditionary Force, or the BEF, was sent across the Channel. They were professional soldiers, known as Old Contemptibles, but they were walking into a machine-grade slaughterhouse. As the war began, the French military was blinded by offensive spirit. They marched into battle with colors unfurled, bands playing, and soldiers dressed in bright blue coats and red trousers. They charged with bayonets against modern machine guns. The result was a massacre. In the Battle of the Frontiers, France lost 300,000 men in just weeks. The romanticism of 19th century warfare died in the mud of the Ardennes and the Charleroi. The Allies were forced into a great retreat. The German army was a gray tide sweeping closer and closer to Paris. By early September, the German generals could see the Eiffel Tower. The French government fled the capital. It looked like the war would be over in weeks. But then came the miracle of the Marne. The French and British found a gap in the German lines. In a desperate move, 6,000 French reserves were ferried to the front in Parisian taxicabs. It was enough. The German advance was halted. Fearing they would be outflanked, the Germans retreated and did something that would define the next 4 years. They dug in. This was the end of the War of Movement. From the Swiss border to the North Sea, a line of trenches was dug. The race to the sea ended in a stalemate. The war became a static nightmare of barbed wire, mud, and no man's land. While the West was freezing into a stalemate, the East was a landscape of massive movement. 2 Russian armies invaded East Prussia. For a moment, it looked like Germany would be crushed from both sides. But the Russian commanders loathed each other, and the Germans exploited this. At the Battle of Tannenberg, the Germans surrounded and destroyed the Russian Second Army. 95,000 Russians were captured. The Russian commander, General Samsonov, was so ashamed he walked into the forest and shot himself. By the fall of 1914, the professional British Army was almost gone, buried in the mud of Ypres. Lord Kitchener realized this war wouldn't be over by Christmas. He released his famous poster, "Your country needs you," and over 1 million men volunteered. They formed PALS battalions, groups of friends from the same towns and factories who joined together. It was a beautiful display of patriotism that would lead to the heartbreak of entire towns losing their entire male population in a single day of fighting later in the war. The year ended with one of the most poignant moments in human history. On Christmas Eve, 1914, the sound of carols rose from the trenches. In some sectors, German and British soldiers laid down their rifles and met in no man's land. They shared cigarettes, exchanged small gifts, and even played soccer. For one day, they remembered they were human beings, not just targets. But the truce could not last. The officers ordered the men back to the trenches. The guns began to fire again. The tragedy of 1914 was that the world had every chance to stop the madness, but a lack of prudence and a surplus of pride pushed them over the edge. The lights were going out all over Europe, and they would not be lit again for a very long time.